Thank you, John. And thank you to the organizers of the conference, as well as Stanford. And we also want to thank our editor, Richard Sloan, and our two anonymous reviewers for the opportunity to present this paper, A New Take on Voice, the Influence of BlackRock's Dear CEO Letters. And this is co-authored work with Nikki Skinner and Laura Wellman. Now, I'd like to start by placing this paper in the context of the prior literature. We know that engagement is an important tool where investors use their voice and express their preferences to their portfolio firms. Most of the prior work on engagement has focused on targeted engagement. So investors engaging directly with one firm or a small set of firms. And that may take place in private, and research is a little limited there, obviously due to lack of data, or in public, where firms are called out publicly, but it's only a small subset of firms. So for example, the CalPERS target list or activist campaigns. In contrast, where we're gonna focus in this paper is on a broad-based public engagement. And this broad-based public engagement has been proposed by legal scholars as a potentially efficient mechanism for diversified investors to express their preferences to all their portfolio firms at the same time. And it may be less costly and serve as a substitute or complement to the more timely private engagement. Now, the setting we're going to use to investigate this question is the BlackRock Dear CEO letter. The BlackRock Dear CEO letter is a letter from Larry Fink addressed to the CEOs of all portfolio firms. It's also posted publicly on the BlackRock website. It comes out at around the end of January each year. And this letter began in 2012. And since its inception, the letter has emphasized the importance of firms having a long-term focus. Since 2016, the contents of the letter have varied more across years. And specifically as an example up here, I have the 2017 letter, which highlighted the issue of the changing demands on labor due to technology, as well as the importance of addressing ESG issues in terms of a firm's overall strategy. Now, it's clear that the letter has garnered media attention, both straight news coverage and several opinion pieces, both for and against the letter. But thinking of this letter as a form of broad-based public engagement, the important question is, do firms respond? And if so, how do they respond? And at a high level, that's the question we hope to address in this paper. Now, when we turn to thinking about how do we expect firms to respond, we're going to look to the contents of the letter itself to say, what is BlackRock asking firms to do? And there are several instances of the letter where BlackRock asks firms to discuss their strategies and the challenges they're facing. And we see that as a call for information. Now, potentially firms could communicate that information, those strategies directly to BlackRock, in which case we couldn't see that. But fortunately for us, BlackRock asked that these strategies be communicated broadly to all investors, to give all investors an understanding. So the first question we're going to investigate is, do firms respond to BlackRock's broad-based public engagement by altering their public disclosures that would be visible to all investors? To study this question, our design is going to focus on looking at the actual narrative of firms' disclosure and comparing that to the BlackRock letter. Do firms in their 8Ks in the 30 days post make their disclosure more similar? So we're going to use a cosine similarity measure, compare the text of the 8Ks to the text of the BlackRock letter. Now, obviously a concern here would be, well, maybe there are just firms that generally disclose more like BlackRock. Well, if that's the case, we would expect to see that in the pre-period. So our key measure is going to be a change in disclosure similarity. What's the similarity in the post-period less the similarity in the pre-period? Our key independent variable of interest in this test are going to be measures of BlackRock ownership. The institutional ownership literature is established. Firms are more responsive to their large shareholders. So our expectation is that we should see increases in this change in disclosure similarity with the level of BlackRock ownership. And that is in fact what we find, including controls for a wide variety of firm and disclosure characteristics. Now, our main measure focuses on 8K disclosure because we can get this tight window. We can measure it right after the BlackRock letter, but we do find consistent results if we look at the MD&A section or the risk factor disclosures in the subsequent 10K. Again, not as quite a tight time window, but we think it's important to look at other disclosures as well. Now, although we do look at this tight time window, unfortunately, the BlackRock letter doesn't come out in a vacuum. We know other events are happening to a firm at the same time. So there might be concerns that what we're picking up is not, in fact, a reaction to the BlackRock letter. It's a reaction to something else. Now, again, as I mentioned, we're using this tight time window. In addition, we test the relation between the ownership of Vanguard and State Street and this disclosure similarity, and we do not see a similar result. We do not see a similar increase. And that gives us confidence that we're not just picking up on general trends that happen to be concurrent with the BlackRock letter. Now, we can't exclude the possibility that some other event is causing our results, but in order for another event to be generating these results, it would have to both be contemporaneous with the BlackRock letter and vary with BlackRock ownership. A couple other alternative explanations or other issues we've considered is, of course, private engagement. We know that on average in our sample period, BlackRock is engaging with about 850 firms in the Americas region per year. Now, we have no expectation that private engagement happens concurrent with the letter. Our understanding it is spread out through the year and if anything concentrated in proxy season. So our test shouldn't be picking up private engagement, but just to ensure that we control for private engagement by collecting the firms BlackRock engaged with. And this data is only available 2018 going forward from BlackRock's annual stewardship report. And we control for that or exclude those firms. You also might have some concerns about the types of disclosure. Maybe it's just the types of 8Ks that are getting disclosed in that post period, and they happen to be similar to the BlackRock letter. And we've given a lot of consideration to this. We've controlled for the types of 8Ks. We actually do find a similar makeup of 8Ks in the pre and post period, and we've identified pre-periods that have even more similar makeup of 8Ks. So I hope at this point I've convinced you that firms are in fact changing their disclosure in response to the BlackRock letter. But those changes we're picking up in our disclosure similarity score could actually represent a variety of different behaviors. It could be that firms are acknowledging or quantifying the impact of issues important to BlackRock, so providing new information. It could be that firms are actually saying that they have changed or will change their strategies in response to this information. And both of these first two options we think would be of value to BlackRock. On the other hand, firms could be providing useless or boilerplate disclosure. They could just be listing a lot of buzzwords. You might sometimes hear this referred to as greenwashing. Or they could actually be expressing disagreement with BlackRock. If they say we're not going to do anything related to ESG, you actually get a relatively high cosine similarity score there. And we'd like to be able to distinguish between actions that are of value to BlackRock and those that are unlikely to be valued. And to do this, I've actually reached the most dangerous part of my presentation to give when you know the head of investment stewardship at BlackRock is on the panel after your presentation, but I'm going to try to make some inferences about BlackRock's behavior. And to do that, to hopefully step away from the danger zone, I am going to again rely on what BlackRock is saying. BlackRock has said that they will exercise their voting rights if they feel management is not adequately responding to their requests. And specifically, BlackRock has noticed that they will support shareholder proposals and specifically environmental and social shareholder proposals, again, if management is not sufficiently responsive. So to identify if BlackRock is valuing the changes in disclosure that firms are making, what we're going to look at is BlackRock's voting behavior. How do the changes in disclosure associate with BlackRock's votes at the subsequent annual meeting? And specifically what we're going to consider is do any BlackRock funds vote in opposition to management on shareholder proposals? So this would mean BlackRock is supporting a shareholder proposal that management recommends against. And we're going to look at all shareholder proposals. And then at the suggestion of one of our referees, we are also going to look at ES proposals because a lot of the letter topics are related to environmental and social issues. And our expectation here is that if firms are in fact providing valuable disclosures, those firms with greater increases in disclosure similarity are going to be less likely to receive the disciplinary action of a vote against management by BlackRock. And again, that is what we find in our results. So given these results, we believe that it is unlikely that on average firms are either providing useless disclosure or providing actually expressing opposition to BlackRock. So either they're providing new information or they're actually communicating changes in strategy. Now, and we think both of those are valuable actions. but we recognize that there may be specific interest in our firms actually changing actions beyond disclosure. So in our final research question, we're going to attempt to address this issue. In this case, we think it actually may be relatively hard to pick up actions because BlackRock's pretty clear they don't expect any sort of one-size-fits-all action. They're not saying like all firms should increase research and development. But what we do see is there is advocacy for changes in public policy. So that's what we're going to focus on. And so to address our third research question, do firms take action beyond disclosure to align themselves with the BlackRock letter? What we're going to focus on is a firm's lobbying behavior. Now we're going to set up our lobbying test similar to our disclosure test. And so what we want to do is have a measure of the similarity between the issues a firm is lobbying for and the BlackRock letter. Now, I assumed all of you were familiar with 8K disclosure, so I didn't show an 8K, but I think lobbying, myself included, I was relatively less familiar. Firms have to provide lobbying reports, and along with specifying the bills they lobby on, it will provide a textual disclosure about the specific issues they are lobbying on. So that's what we're going to compare to the BlackRock letter to get this similarity between lobbying behavior and the BlackRock letter. And again, we're going to subtract out the pre-similarity because we want to identify specifically what is happening in the post period. Again, we will condition this. We expect this to increase in BlackRock ownership. And again, at the suggestion of one of our referees, lobbying behavior may only change if firms already are aligned with BlackRock's preferences. And so to identify alignment with BlackRock's preferences, we're going to look at firms that support Democrats, meaning that they gave over 75% of their contributions to Democrats, because the Democratic platform is a lot more similar to the issues discussed in the BlackRock letters than the Republican Party platform. Now, in our results, if all firms are changing their lobbying behavior, we would expect a positive coefficient on this main result. If the changes are limited to firms already aligned with BlackRock's preferences, we're going to see it down here in the interaction terms. And when we look at the main result, we find sort of mixed results. But when we get down to the interaction terms, we find strong positive results, suggesting the firms that ex ante were aligned with BlackRock's preferences are the ones that are, in fact, changing their lobbying behavior. So in conclusion, our results are consistent with institutional owners influencing firms through broad-based public engagement. And specifically in this setting, what we find is that firms are changing the narrative of their disclosures in response to BlackRock's letters. And this effect is incremental to private engagement. We also show that BlackRock appears to value these disclosures. And finally, that these changes in disclosure seem to be accompanied by strategic action and specifically lobbying, at least for some firms. Thank you very much for listening to the presentation, and we're really looking forward to hearing from the panelists as well as getting your questions.